I am going to ask all of our speakers to come on screen. Please welcome David Keyes, the Director of Extreme Computing Research Center at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and Tony Amar, an analyst with Intersect 360 Research, and Addison Snell, the co-founder and CEO of 360 Research. Thank you guys for coming online.
Thanks, Jay. Great to be here as usual.
Thank you.
So Addison, certainly happy to have you back. And David and Tony, I'm glad you could join us for this first time. Mary, I'll ask to stop sharing the screen so we can get most of the real estate dedicated to our speakers now. And we will move into things. I'm going to ask you first just to give a real quick intro to yourself with a focus on your interests in HPC, AI, and quantum computing.
Well, I was fortunate enough 16 years ago to be the founding dean at a university that SIAM called the world's first computational science and engineering university, where we have had 3 successive top 20 systems and about 2/3 of the faculty supercompute, even if some of them do other things in their labs. So we have a busy agenda of mostly sustainable technologies oriented computing. And as the extreme computing identified person, I get all the questions about better algorithms, emerging hardware, when will quantum be here, and so forth. So it's very important for me to come to ISC and network and keep up with all the trends. And thank you very much, Jay, for providing this venue.
David, thanks for doing that. And I confess that 16 years ago when you made that decision, there was a little thought in my mind like, what is he doing? Is this a good move? David's such a thought leader. And of course, as it turned out, it was a fantastic move. And I remember thinking to myself when I thought that about your move, well, everybody asked me the same question when I went to start the Texas Advanced Computing Center, which before that didn't exist in that form and just had a dozen people in a small system. And it's funny how these things work out. And I really applaud what you've done with CALS. It's been amazing.
Thank you. I actually came on a 1-year leave from Columbia, but it's been prolonged.
I do remember that too, actually. Addison.
Hi, everybody. I'm Addison Snell with Intersect 360 Research. I've been an analyst in this space for more than 20 years, most of that time with Intersect 360 Research, which we started almost 20 years ago. So most of you are familiar with me through that role, and we had a great time at ISC, including an expanded analyst team, part of which you're going to meet. Of course, I was there with Steve Conway, Paul Musio, but 2 new analysts on the team, Kevin Jackson and Tony Amar, who you're about to meet. I love high performance computing, and I'm a puzzle and game enthusiast, including word puzzles, which you see scattered around my office, and looking forward to more of the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Including a crossword or 2 in the New York Times, right?
Yeah, right here. I've published a few of them, 3 in the New York Times, including a Sunday, 2 in the Wall Street Journal. So yeah, that was a bucket list item for me.
And I love the way you've included high performance computing as an answer in some puzzles in the past.
Slightly adjacent themes. Yeah, it's hard to work in the whole thing across a grid, but yeah, I'll try to get Boisseau into my next puzzle.
My goal is to be famous enough to be on Wheel of Fortune, since my last name's all vowels, and I'll bankrupt the contestants on that.
Yeah, you got to buy the vowels. That's how you
got to buy the vowels. Antonia.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Antonia Mar. Addison already introduced me a bit, but yeah, I joined Intersect 360 Research this year as an analyst. I mean, you all know we specialize in HPC and AI. And I'm actually based in Frankfurt, so I'm really interested also in Europe and what's going on there. Everything is evolving, and yeah, I've been following the developments at ISC 25, and I'm excited to share some insights from the conference with all of you.
Well, that's great, and let's hit a home run right out of the gate here. I'm going to ask you each to share succinctly and concisely, but inspiringly, perhaps. What was your single greatest revelation at ISC 2025? The technology or perhaps application of a technology that most excited you or inspired you? And Antonia, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yes, I'm happy to. So for me, one of the most important undercurrents at ISC 25 is the way sustainability is actually reframed. So it's no longer just a question of responsibility, it's a question of viability, you could say. And I mean, historically, we thought about scaling limits in terms of, I don't know, performance, latency, or memory bandwidth. But now it got clear that energy availability and cost per watt are becoming the true bottlenecks. So yeah, what struck me at ISC is that some of the most forward-looking players, I don't know, from AMD to startups like Core, are treating energy efficiency as a core product feature and not a side benefit anymore. And yeah, I mean, to me, that makes sense. If you can deliver the same performance with lower power draw, you're not just being green, you're also being cheaper, more scalable, and more deployable across constrained environments. And yeah, this got clear at ISC 25 to me, and I'm happy that it's being talked about as well. So yes.
Antonio, quick follow-up to that. In your impression, did you feel like the sustainability approach was more about cost, more about cost of power, more about power availability, or more about green issues?
To be honest, as I said, I think it's been reframed, which is good because it can only go hand in hand. I mean, sustainability is also about being more green, but I think you can sell it better if you also portray it as something where you can have less cost, if you know what I'm trying to say by that. And I think that's actually like a great option to also help the planet in some way. And yeah.
Addison, how about you?
I'm going to go with neither. You were asking about one thing that struck me as inspirational, and I'm going to say neither the technology nor the application. For me, the theme this year was connecting the dots, and I had felt an overwhelming sense of community at this year's conference. And I've always loved ISC vis-a-vis other conferences like supercomputing, where it's a little more focused down to, I find these are the 4,000 people who really love this segment of the market and show up as part of it. This is the 40th year of ISC. I was honored to be asked to organize a special 40 years of ISC kind of commemorative panel that touched not only the technologies and scientific innovation, but some of these issues around community building and building the next generation of talent to carry it forward. I found that community aspect of it to be palpable this year, and that's what I'm really carrying with me coming out of it.
All right, and David, what was your highlight from ISC?
Yeah, I was happy that Antonia identified sustainability. I had energy efficiency as my most, let's say, predominant theme. It's the elephant in the auditorium, if you will. The first two keynotes were about that. One by Papermaster on the technology side, accompanied by Oak Ridge examples on Frontier. And then the second one entirely devoted to climate, moving from highly resolved PDE-based simulations to machine-learned climates, and then reduced to models that can run on laptops to sort of democratize climate simulations. Of course, Eric Strohmeyer pointed out in his traditional top 500 every 6-month check-in that in the last 17 years, Green 500 has documented a 100-fold power efficiency improvement in gigaflops per watt. And part of, in addition to that, we have an extensive exploration of mixed precision, which, as Antonia, intimated, gives more bytes per second, less energy to get the words of the computation in. And as another aspect of energy efficiency, which I guess we're going to continue to discuss, it's the prospects of integrating quantum processors into supercomputing, because where they will have advantage, they will have massive energy advantages. So altogether, it was a ISC highly dedicated to addressing the energy elephant.
So I love those.
There you go. They beat me 2-1. Sustainability.
But I love those answers. Community and sustainability is great. Now I'm going to ask you, though, for name a technology, specifically a technology, not an approach, not an application, but a technology that you saw that impressed you with either its emergence or its evolution at ISC. And so, David, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Okay, well, I don't know if you're going to allow software to be a technology, but the best paper went to the TUM and LRZ group with the Schultzes as terminal co-authors. And it was about integrating quantum into their major classical systems there. It really it followed on a software package called SysSage that Schultz developed last year to just basically provide dynamic runtime information to applications better than HWLoc for particularly GPU heterogeneity. And over the past year, they extended it to QPU heterogeneity. And I think it could be extended not just to one quantum partition, but to multiple different types of quantum partitions in the future. I envision a quantum first sort of cascade of architectures, with QPUs being used wherever they will have an advantage, followed by GPUs for the remaining throughput dominated work that's not quantum advantaged, following CPUs for the latency dominated work. So SysSage is one of the sort of new software packages, open source, GitHub and all that, which sort of portends the very challenging computer science problem of balancing three kinds of shared resources. All of them might be time shared by different applications within the same supercomputer. That's a highly non-trivial task, because some calculation may be suspended waiting for the quantum device to do somebody else's calculation. And as we know, there's a lot of I/O time latency and going back and forth with QPUs like there used to be with GPUs. So I see that software framework, which was recognized as best paper, as a very exciting new technology.
David, if you could, while Addison and Antonio are answering this, if you could put a link to that in the chat window for all the attendees, that would be fantastic. I want to read this paper. I'm excited about it now. I missed that. So Addison, how about you next?
Yeah, I'll pick photonics as something that I'm really interested in continuing to track. I think we talked a lot about quantum computing, and that's appropriate as a new approach that's out there in the future. But I would like to see photonics elevated to that same level of interest. If we go back to SC last year in November, I thought one of the most interesting companies that I talked to that I hadn't met with before was LightSolver, which had a new hypothetical non-von Neumann architecture based on frickin' laser beams and what they could build with that. That was a little further out there. This time at ISC, I met with a company called Black Semiconductor, which had I thought a very practical graphene-based approach that could be integrated with current technologies going forward. Neither of those companies is a client or anything. They're both early stage. I just had speed dates with them, right, to say, all right, what's out there. So this isn't an endorsement or anything, but I think the whole photonics space, and I would extend that into optical interconnects and things that are based on optics. I think that was a technology that for me, they're all great, but and I want to track quantum and these other things going forward. But in terms of an innovative technology, I think we're not talking enough about. I'll take photonics.
I love that answer. I'm glad you brought that up. Antonia.
I mean, Addison now beat me to it. That was actually the answer I wanted to give. But another thing that comes to my mind is we talked to a company called Sutacore, which does cooling systems, and they do direct to chip liquid cooling, but without water. So, I mean, that means that you can cool super dense, high performance systems by using way less power and space, to go back to what I said by answering the first question. And yeah, I mean, this is something else that was interesting to me after Addison said my major point that I wanted to make. But yes.
Confluence is indicative.
I'm going to ask you a long question and ask for relatively short answer on it. And that's about silicon. High performance computing starts at the silicon that delivers the flops. Did you see much momentum changes in CPUs and accelerators? For example, did you see any indication of ARM or RISC-V's significant growth or emergence as in market share, or something that pretends for significant market share growth for those CPU types, or any other accelerator? We all know everybody's got NVIDIA GPUs somewhere in their data center, but any other accelerator options, and not counting the quantum systems as QPUs, David, but any other silicon-based accelerator options that you saw kind of emerging, or that you think you saw enough of at ISC that might be emerging over the next 6 to 12 months and our audience should maybe start tracking? Addison, why don't we start with you on this one?
Oh, no, I'm not going ahead of Antonia again. You got to let her go first.
All right, Antonia.
I mean,
Take Addison's answer out of his mouth.
I mean, we obviously saw some momentum around ARM and RISC-V. I mean, I think you can't go to Europe without talking about these two. But the way I perceived it is that they're still more niche or specialized, you could say, in context that than as mainstream HPC players. So like, there's definitely growing interest, I would say, but the big commercial traction is still ahead. I mean, what stood out to me was AMD, as David already said in his first answer. In the opening keynote, they were talking about their Instinct MI300 and MI350 accelerators, and also the MI300A, which is already running in systems like El Capitano or Frontier. And I mean, to me, what is also really important is, or what was also really interesting, was the fact that they even beat their 3x25 goal and had a 38x improvement in node level energy efficiency. I mean, this is huge. And if you wanted to more numbers, even it's 97% energy reduction to get the same performance as 5 years ago. And again, that's not just a green win, that's also a cost advantage. And I would say this sets AMD up as a credible alternative to NVIDIA, especially in environments valuing energy efficiency and open software. So yes, I leave it there and hand things over to David now.
Okay, well, RISC-V is now on the market with Tense Torrent, I believe. I didn't hear that myself, but I polled some of my colleagues, and that was a highlight for them. It's open source. It's cost-effective computing, and I think it will emerge. I don't have any dogs in this fight in terms of future, in terms of immediate acquisitions, but it's definitely something that we have to watch.
Yeah, you asked for a fast answer on this, but there's an underlying dynamic here that we talked about a lot at the show, which is to what extent the AI market is outstripping or outpacing the HPC market. And I wrote an article right immediately prior to the show in HPC Wire about HPC has finally found its killer app. Can it survive? And I don't mean that AI is truly killing HPC, but it is taking a lot of the air out of the room. And, while this is one of the, ISC was one of the most important HPC events of the year, it was not one of the 3 biggest AI events last week. GTC Paris was going on. AMD had its own advancing AI event. Databricks had a data and AI summit. There was something else in the UK that I wasn't even really aware of. And I think what that did is for the HPC focused crowd, it did clear the lane a little bit where we can talk about companies like Tense Torrent or SciPearl or Next Silicon that are delivering, and it's always hazardous to name a few because I'm going to leave a couple out, but those were people I've been meeting with that are really at home in this space right here. Yeah, they've got to figure out where they fit on the broader AI market. It's not just HPC, but I think it's a really timely question, Jay. Thank you.
I fully expect that if Doug Norton views this, he'll say, "Why did you leave out Inspire Semi, for example?" But I
should not have left out Inspire Semi. I met with them early in the year, so I didn't meet with them at ISC, so that's why I didn't think of it at the moment. But yeah, absolutely, Inspire Semi totally goes onto that list. Thank you.
Jay,
go ahead.
Before you go on, I mean, you asked about silicon, so we haven't really talked about the wafer scale companies, but they had a tutorial on the last day. They didn't get that much attention, Cerebras, Grok, and Sambanova, all those things early on. They weren't part of the energy discussion per se, but I think that's an example of another form of silicon to watch. Got it.
Well, the next question I was going to ask you, you've all sort of addressed it in your answers to previous questions, but I was going to ask, what did you observe about the HPC AI convergence or conflict, or what have you. And I think I actually already know how at least two of the three of you view AI and HPC, but I would, and Addison, you just talked about this a bit, but I would like to hear from each of the three of you how you see these HPC conferences evolving with AI becoming this dominant workload. And do you think the HPCers will have their way and AI will always be looked at by us, at least in the HPC space, as an AI workload? Or do you see this emergence of this AI as a separate infrastructure completely as we start developing more and more specialized things for it that might have less and less of the features that simulation folks might need? Any thoughts on that occurring at this meeting? What you saw between convergence, conflict, harmony? Addison, let's start with you on this one.
I'll dive in on that. And because we got into this debate toward the end of the fishbowl panel, which is so much fun, and at the risk of disagreeing with Thorsten Hoeffler, where he's much smarter than I am in all of these ways, but he was in his closing talk was talking about AI is just a different HPC workload, and what are we all so afraid of, and we need to embrace it. And I get it, but the point of that article that I posted a link in the chat isn't that AI is displacing HPC, but it is a single workload that has become so dominant that it's this one workload is driving all of the investment in the space right now. And if you have an HPC workload that's not AI, it's a little harder to get that level of attention. And what I mean to say is that we can say, oh, AI, that's just another form of HPC from our perspective. Conversely, it's not true. Most of the money and people going into AI are not thinking of it as HPC. So this is one of these all squares or rectangles, kind of problems where, you can look at all the rectangles out there and the square and the squares are feeling all good about it, but it's just not the same the other way around, where people are saying, oh yeah, we just do HPC. Try going to an infrastructure conference like the AI infrastructure conference or YADA or one of these other ones. They have tons of talk about large scale data center, but they don't think of it as HPC.
Right. Yeah. And Tony, you want to go next?
Yes. I mean, as Addison already said in some of the panels, you could feel that parts of the HPC community are still a bit protective, you could say, which I totally get. I mean, there's a concern about how AI might shift focus or reshape priorities. But I mean, at the same time, it's clear that these two worlds have to coexist in some kind. And I mean, AI is changing how we think about speed and flexibility, and HPC, on the other hand, brings structure and trust and long-term reliability, which is especially important for areas like, for example, pharma. And yes, so I would say the convergence is happening, but it's not just about infrastructure. It's also a cultural shift in those companies. What I, for example, also had in conversations is that these teams often live in completely different parts of the organization. So AI is, for example, often under IT, and HPC sits in R&D and product design. And therefore, they report to different people, they measure differently, and that makes it kind of hard to build systems that serve both well, I would say. And I would say this is something where more emphasis should be on. So bridging organizational and cultural divides between HPC and AI teams. And this is my take on this.
All right, Addison or David, what do y'all want to add here?
Well, a small part of AI is scientific machine learning. And there, the convergence with HPC is very strong and two-way. For example, there's extensive penetration of machine learning into modeling and simulation in terms of surrogates that are cheaper than the first principles. We learn potentials in materials or effective viscosities in fluid mechanics or whatever, albedos in weather and so forth. That's much better coming from ML, it seems. And also there's the realization that for scientific ML, we're never going to have enough experiments or observations. Most of the training data is going to come from mod and sim. And maybe in the future for materials and chemistry, most of the training data from ML is going to come from quantum. So there'll always be these strong links within the scientific side. And as Addison said, that's completely dominated. AI is completely dominated by the other side of marketing and recommender systems and classification and surveillance and all those things. But to the extent that the tools are, carrying over, there's a good, cross-coupling in both directions between scientific ML and HPC. And it's very healthy, and it makes the whole thing very exciting.
That's a great point, David. And I stayed for the very end, the Friday afternoon workshop on Trillion Parameter Consortium, which is led by Argonne and Barcelona Supercomputer and RECON, but has dozens of labs signed on worldwide around using synthetic or mod sim data for AI for science. I think it's a really important initiative, and I'm looking forward to the TPC conference that'll be in the Bay Area, Santa Clara, San Jose, whichever one it is, at the end of July. It's my hometown, so I get to go to that one.
I'm coming to that one too. I look forward to seeing you there. All right. One thing I haven't heard any of you mention in this, we've talked about chips and accelerators, a little bit on optical networking, at least a bit on quantum AI. I haven't heard any of you mention storage. What was your most interesting revelation storage-wise at this conference? Or did you see anything that really raised your eyebrows in the storage space? Addison, let's start with you on this one.
I love tracking storage in this space and have made that a big focus of our research over the last 2 decades. And what I see is that, we get these high performance storage specialists, Weka, Vast, Vidura, which is the former Panasys, DDN, Hammer Space, and they've really all been taking off as part of the AI revolution, that architecting storage for a large-scale AI data center is not remarkably different. It's probably even more similar than it is on the compute side. And they've drafted off of that very well. What's the trend that really is the head scratcher for me is that the larger scale enterprise storage players, NetApp, EMC, Hitachi, Vantara, have been left in the starting blocks on this. Like, where are they? That we get the HPC specialists, I can cheer them on, but I'm looking around for where these big enterprise storage solutions are for AI, and they were still not part of the conversation. Pure is starting to get in the game. They're out there now, but that's been more recent, those developments. So yeah, we're absolutely watching it, but it's kind of a puzzling market dynamic right now.
As an interesting insight. Antonia, how about you go next?
To be honest, I have nothing to add to Addison's point. So I will hand it over to David on this one.
I have nothing to add in terms of flash or silicon, but I happened to be at IPDPS the week before ISC, along with maybe a dozen other folks who made the trip from Milan to Hamburg. And we had there a guest speaker from IBM Zurich, Robert Haas, who's heavily into cold storage and making tape useful in terms of racks that, one rack can hold the amount of tapes from, a whole room full of racks the way we remember them with, macroscopic robots. They're little, very small robots that manipulate this tape, which has tracks as fine as 5 nanometers and subject to a lot of, fine tuning in terms of the physics of manipulating it. But it's much more compact and much more automatic. Robert said, a human never needs to open this. So I was intrigued, given the unwillingness of climate people, among others, to compress their data and want to keep, centuries of simulated data. And, if data doubles every year, then, we need to double the amount of storage, the cold storage, that is to say, for it. So
as an analyst, from time to time, we get things right. And I'm really glad that we never signed on to the idea that tape is dead or even going away. We've been saying it's actually growing as part of the environment. It has the most bytes per dollar, the most bytes per watt, the most bytes per floor tile, and the media lasts 3 to 5 times longer without degrading. Tape is a huge part of these environments. And, we had a great meeting this week with SpectraLogic. They're growing in this space right now. I think Active Archive, which they talked about a lot over the last decade, really has its moment in the sun that, you want it in cold storage and archive, but you also want to be able to mount it and understand what's there. That's LTFS was a major technological advancement over the last 20 years, and being able to mount your tape and get a directory listing, what's there, I think it's a big deal.
I am so glad I asked this question. This has probably been the biggest revelation for me in moderating this. That is not the answer I expected, but I'm glad that you shared it, because that's really important for our community to hear. So thank you.
Yeah.
Antonia, did you address this one?
She passed.
Oh, she
sorry?
passed.
Yes, I did.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question about quantum computing. Now, you've all mentioned it at some point in here. There was a good quantum computing presence at ISC, and I think that might be indicative of a European view on wanting to be leaders in quantum computing. But I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, which is, did you see enough in quantum computing here and talk to enough people in it that it made you more or less optimistic about quantum computing? Did it change your views in a positive or negative light about it potentially being useful as an accelerator in HPC applications this decade?
I'll bite. I think the answer is yes. I don't know if it will be before I retire, but I know it will be an integral part of all of my students. So I think we have a great responsibility to teach the mathematics of qubit manipulation before we get real qubits. And I was very encouraged at this meeting by the quantum presence. Some of the vendors who had, rented rooms on the third floor and called us up at different times, by the depth. I mean, these people have actually found some great hires who are very articulate and also very realistic about the challenges that need to be surmounted. I didn't hear a lot of hype, but I heard a lot of optimism that the so-called Rose's law, the Moore's law of qubits, can be hit. And I think IBM just released on June 10th a promise of fault-tolerant quantum computing by 2029. These kind of promises are easy to make, hard to hold people to, but we are gradually transitioning from NISQ to fault tolerant in small numbers of reliable qubits rather than massive numbers of unreliable ones. And it's the mathematics of it is worth doing, and maybe we'll get qubits at a certain schedule.
Sounds good. Antonia and Addison, anything to add to that?
I can only say I agree. I agree that quantum definitely had a strong presence at ISC. I mean, which makes sense since Europe is trying to position itself as a leader in quantum. And I would also say there was less hype talk and more focus on actual integration paths and hybrid workflows and what's actually needed to make it useful in practice. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely great response. And I do prefer the conversations I have about quantum on the European landscape versus the American landscape. I had a conversation together with Bob Sorensen from Hyperion about this very thing not long ago. And we were agreed that in Europe, we see something that's a lot more community focused and collaborative. I think Crystal Michelzi from Euro HPC joint undertaking is one of the most important voices in quantum right now. So there's absolutely that. And I met with a company I hadn't met with before, Quantum Motion. What was noteworthy there is that they had an application engineer on the team and in the meeting. Like that was something fresh to me, that he was representing specific application point of view. So, +1 for Quantum Motion for bringing that into the meeting.
Awesome. Now I'm going
Quantum Motion.
Go ahead, David.
It's one of 7 hardware devices on the floor at the UK's new National Quantum Computing Center. They have 2 neutral atom, 2 photonic, 1 trapped ion, 1 spin, and 1 superconducting machine on their floor right now for at least UK scientists to start getting their hands dirty with. It's it's impressive, the European effort.
Yeah, I agree with you all. It definitely seems the European community is interested in working together more and realistic but optimistic at the same time. And I enjoyed talking to the different vendors there and different people about quantum. I'm going to ask you one constructive criticism question about ISC 2025. We all liked the meeting, but what disappointed you, or at least what would you recommend to the organizers for next year? And Addison, I know you're a huge fan of ISC, so everybody will take this in the spirit in which it's intended. But is there anything that disappointed you, or at least is there a major recommendation you would, and probably with your connections will, make to the ISC organizers for next year?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to the point I made before, that the AI market is now a lot bigger than the HPC market. And I think we, as a whole industry, not just ISC, need to be alert to the idea that if we're trying to be inclusive of AI and say, oh yeah, AI, that's just part of HPC, realize that the rest of the world isn't thinking of it that way. So if we're going to be inclusive of AI, then there needs to be a real shift around how are we tackling some of these hyperscaler enterprise AI things that are not well tied to high performance computing, so that you don't wind up with GTC Paris and AMD advancing AI, not even considering ISC to be a scheduling conflict, or find your identity on AI within science and double down on that, and hone what aspect of AI are we owning here, so it doesn't feel as much like a push-pull. But this community, I think, is really important. I'd hate to see it get lost in the larger noise of AI. So that would be my one bit of advice.
That is a great suggestion. I love that. Antonia.
Connecting to what Addison just said, when we talk about AI, I think it's really important to also talk about or have some discussions about regulation and safety or long-term governance. And that is something I missed a bit at ISC this year.
Good one.
I mean, I think there's room and responsibility for firms like ISC to go deeper on that, and not just what we can build with AI, but also how we build it responsibly. And yeah, this is maybe something I would encourage the ISC organizers to do next time a bit more in depth, especially when we put AI even more on the agenda. But I mean, as someone attending ISC for the first time, I was generally impressed by the openness of the community and also the breadth of perspectives. And I'm excited to see how it continues to evolve. And I'm super happy to go back next year.
All right.
Great answer. And in 5 seconds, I'll say, move past the how do we prevent bad actors. That's dumb. You don't prevent bad actors. What do we do about bad actors? That's the question.
I think it's still a worthy point to consider. How do we limit the number of bad actors? But you're right. Just like in computer security, all computer security folks figure, all right, we got to prevent people from getting in, and we have to assume somebody's already gotten in. So, David
didn't get to go. Yeah.
I had no personal disappointments, but one of our students was very disappointed about the hole in FPGA at this conference, especially since, we're supposedly very interested in energy efficiency and emerging architectures and heterogeneity. And that was underrepresented, although Professor Lin Gan from Tsinghua has FPGA interest that he worked into his Jack Donguera Early Career Award talk on day one, but then it wasn't really followed up. And I'm not necessarily pushing it as a central item, but I think we could do more with, educating ourselves about the improvements in programming those devices and their energy efficiency capabilities.
Yeah, I'm going to add to this one. There are a couple of things that I hope will be a little different next year. One is I hope ISC will not be cross-scheduled against things that attract many of the same audience. It was unfortunate. That week was unfortunate timing, as you mentioned, with a couple of other conferences, and actually another one that you didn't mention, but there were multiple conferences that week that were competing for the same attendees. And I would like to, I hope that can be worked out a little bit better next year. And another is I'd love to see the exhibition floor be a little more energized and have a bit more of the big players in it. And speaking as a new employee of one of those who is not on the exhibition floor, I say objectively, I'd love to see some of the silicon solution and cloud vendors that weren't on the exhibition floor back on that next year. And I hope some things can be done, and it's a longer discussion, but I hope some things that can be done to activate that, because that brings a lot of excitement with cool demos and booth talks and things like that. All right, final question for you all. Regardless of ISC 2025, what are you most excited about in our field in the next 6 to 12 months for the remainder of the year, or maybe bleeding into 2026, if you will? David, going to start with you on this one.
Can I give you two? Because one of them actually we haven't addressed from ISC, and that is the emergence of Ultra Ethernet, which Torsten Hoffler actually, he had a session and then he launched the webpage on June 11th. I think I think it's going to be very interesting to watch HPC quality communication, spread. But in terms of 6 months, I think it will be interesting to watch the penetration and exploitation of more types of floating point, like Ozaki, which I know Addison is a fan of. It was recently written up by Doug Edin in HPC Wire following a tip from Addison. It looks very efficient, and it will harness HPC AI hardware very effectively, and maybe posits and other custom floating points that are being introduced. IEEE 754 has some competition, and it will be very interesting to explore it.
Great. Antonia, I'm going to go with you next.
I will tie back to what we said before. I think it's the shift in mindset. I think we move from build the biggest model to build the most efficient, trustworthy, and usable system. Because the race for scale is starting to hit real world constraints, power, cost, latency, and trust. And I think the next big thing won't just be about faster chips or bigger clusters, but also about smart orchestration, hybrid workflows, and many more things that come into play here. And also what I think is really interesting is to watch how everything will evolve when it comes to sovereignty, and how each of the countries and markets will continue to tackle this problem. Especially in Europe, data sovereignty is a really big topic, and I'm happy to watch how it evolves. Sorry, it was more than one sentence now.
No, that's
Stop
great.
myself here.
You guys have been great at giving wonderful, concise, and compelling answers. Thank you so much for that. I think we have time for a couple of quick questions from our audience as well. I'm going to ask this first one, although it was kind of answered, but you might want to give a different spin or just pass. Samuel Bierberich asks, as a curious EE, was there any information or discussion at ISC 25 about analog hardware or accelerators for AI and HPC? And was there any connection to photonics or photonic technologies in these discussions? So Addison, I know you mentioned photonics at some level, but it's a different flavor of that question. And the first half is specifically about analog hardware accelerators. So did any of you see anything in that area, analog hardware or accelerators for AI and HPC, and about connection of photonics to those in these discussions?
I saw that question come through, and I have to admit I'm a little lost on it. I don't know what's meant by analog in this context. No one was using an abacus. These were all digital devices at some point. So I didn't really get the question. Maybe David knows better.
Well, there's one angle on it, which is that a minority of quantum computers are considered analog as opposed to circuit-based. And that distinction is beginning to become, clearer to me in terms of the relative advantages and disadvantages, and error on one hand and programmability, on the other. For instance, you can build a graph with equal weights on an analog quantum device, but you can't put the variable weights in unless you go to circuits. And, there's a lot of subtleties in this, new field that analog may actually have a place there. I mean, after all, D-Wave was the first one to become commercial with doing QUBO. And, but as Addison said, I didn't hear anything about, like controlling voltages or so forth to get solving differential.
I didn't either. It wasn't a thing at this show that I saw. If it was there, then I missed it. And that's possible. It's a big show, lots of content.
It seems like every few years I hear about a startup doing something with analog computing, not quantum, but analog methods, as David just talked about. But I never seem to hear about them 2 years in a row. And I didn't hear anything this year in that space, other than analog and quantum computing and D-Wave. Let's see. Next question. Hold on. Joshua Williams.
While you're finding the question, I'll +1 both the answers from before. David, the UEC 1.0 spec was the most important individual news announcement from this conference. And Antonio, with sovereignty, these national sovereign AI data centers are the largest growth area in our forecast over the next 5 years.
All right. Interesting for Interesting for me to note that one as well, Addison. So as quantum accelerators emerge as the next essential hardware for AI, so this question has an assumption in it that you may want to address. What safeguards can we put in place to avoid repeating the geopolitical tensions we see today over chip supplies?
You won't. There are going to be geopolitical tensions over chip supplies and more. Geopolitical tensions are on the rise. Get ready for them.
Yeah, Joshua, I'm afraid I agree with Addison on that one. So I think you're going to hear some debate about the use of quantum accelerators as the next essential hardware for AI. There are definitely people that are strongly agreeing with that and strongly disagreeing with that, including both of last week's speakers in this series. But as a more general statement, I agree with Addison. Geopolitical tensions over competitive technologies are on the rise. Any disagreement with that from the panelists?
No, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately, is a great answer. Joshua also had another question. What ISC initiatives, such as the student cluster competition and birds of a feather, could help diversify the AI quantum computing talent pipeline over the next 5 years?
If you want, I can answer that. As I also kind of had a talk about this, or gave a talk about this at ISC. To be honest, I think ISC actually already did a lot to support the talent development and diversity this year. I mean, this year, it's my first year, but I mean, for example, that they did tech talks with women in HPC, but also, as you said, the student cluster competition and buffs. But as I said in my talk, I think we have to broaden our understanding of who belongs into the space and also make those people feel welcome, because some people might never even take the chance in trying to get into the space because it can seem a bit intimidating from the outside. So I think it's also our job to make them feel welcome. And this starts from things like, I don't know, taking a coffee chat that someone asks you for, or answering a LinkedIn request. And yeah, I mean, what else did I want to say? Now I lost my point. Yeah, to round it up, I would say, especially in AI and quantum and HPC, the next wave of innovation will come from unusual combinations. And yeah, this is my take on this. Addison, do you want to add anything?
David first, he's in.
I'll mention a strong plus about diversity at ISC. For the past several years, Horst Simon and I have been grouped with China, Japan, Korea, and Singapore in the HPC in Asia presentations. And this year, HPC in Asia grew, and we were grouped with South Africa, the Caribbean, Brazil, Morocco. In other words, there's diversity, and a lot of it is coming, as Antonia implied, from the desire for sovereignty, especially quantum sovereignty. But all these countries now have HPI centers. They sound just like we do. In other words, they've inherited, the full culture of heterogeneity, HPC integration, energy efficiency, algorithms, applications, architectures as a whole vertical. And I'm very encouraged by, the growth of HPC contributions from the so-called global South.
Yeah, women in HPC had a terrific showing at ISC this year, and ISC in general does a great job with promoting inclusivity, attracting young people with the student cluster competition. I found, we discussed this a little bit in the 40 years of ISC panel, the only conference I've seen on the regular do a better job of bringing young people in is the CHPC National Conference in South Africa under Happy Sithole, where he not only has college student cluster competitions, they bring in high schoolers, they'll bring in middle schoolers for part of the event at age appropriate levels, really helping attract a new generation. As far as diversity and inclusivity, I think it's unfortunate that the term DEI has gotten knocked around a little bit in the US and on a global scale, and to calm down. What does it mean for me in terms of diversity and inclusivity? I want to make this industry more welcoming to more people. Our advisory committees for the HPC AI Leadership Organization have flagged talent development as like the #1 thing that we need in this space. And if we're strict who's coming, it's not only that it's the right thing to do, we need every smart head that we can get. And one thing that I really like about how Kristen Merritt from Women in HPC has approached this with her Move the Needle project last year is she made it not just organizational, but like personal accountability. What can I do this year, like specifically? If I'm going to hire, it's not that I want to guarantee, okay, I'm going to hire a Black person or I'm going to hire a woman, and that's restrictive again. But how can I make sure I'm being welcoming to as many people as possible? Am I making this job available to the full range of talent that I could possibly bring in? And what am I doing specifically in order to do that? I think these are important questions for all of this, from me as running a really small company up to Google, which is one of the biggest companies in the world. We can all look at what's our level of personal accountability in terms of how we make this a more welcoming industry for more people.
100%. I do want to move to our final slides here real quick, and I'm going to cover them in 60 seconds for those of you who are still on. Addison, those were great points, and thank you for name checking Kristen Merritt and Happy Sitole for the great work that they do in this space. So real quickly, everybody, please give a round of applause for the speakers. You can use the meet emoji at the bottom of the screen for doing that. And I'm going to share with you very quickly, we have some upcoming events. Hope that you'll check out the website. It's always going to be the best place to find these upcoming events. Mary, there we go. I needed the controls to advance it. Closing comments, check out the website, check out the YouTube channel, try out Google Cloud. There's plenty of ways to try it for free. Thank you to the team. Give the team a round of applause for putting these things together. And thank you, the attendees, for doing this. I hope you have a great rest of your week. David, Antonia, Addison, thank you so much. We need to turn that episode into a podcast. That was a wonderful listen. I'm going to go back and listen to that again. Thank you all very much for being part of this.